Well, how to work with people. This is, one might say, an eternal topic. Many of you are probably aware, but if you're not, it would be good to mention that Davy and I recently did a 10-part series on relationships. And we cover, it isn't just about personal relationships between a man and a woman or a husband and a wife, but we cover many aspects, including work relationships at work and uh, coming in and out of relationships and how to find proper relationships, many topics over a 10-part course. And so that's available online if you would like to go deeper. But coming to the topic of working with people, um, Swami wrote a very good book uh, about leadership, uh, talking about how we need to lead not with demands or authority, really, but we need to lead with support. His title of the book is Supportive Leadership. And while it's talking specifically about leadership, it is really also talking more deeply about how to work with people. And so there are many good principles in there, but I'll bring just a few to mind. One is that a lot of what we do is dependent on our magnetism. The law of magnetism is central to the whole teachings of yoga. And so first, let's start with the direction of our magnetism, direction of our energy. As our energy flows, it creates a magnetic field. And so if the direction of our energy is positive, that means that we're supportive, we're engaged, we're happy, or at least we're even-minded and cheerful. If the directional flow of our energy is positive, the magnetism that we create will be positive. And people with positive, strong positive magnetism will create a force field that draws others into rise to the positive aspects within them. The opposite is also true. People with negative energy, or when we are expressing negative energy, maybe it's criticism, maybe it's anger, maybe it's any negative mood, means that flow of our consciousness and our energy and our life force is descending. And that creates still, again, magnetism, but negative magnetism. And I'm sure that all of you have seen simple examples of this. When you're in a good mood, people around you seem to be in a good mood. When you're in a bad mood, they reflect your bad mood. And if you're critical, they'll snap back. It's just the way God has created this world so that we can learn the effects of the kind of energy flow that we have. So the first thing that we need to understand in working with people is that they will respond to the kind of energy that we feel and that we put out. And it's all too often people blame others for the problems that they themselves are, in fact, if not creating wholly, at least engaging in to intensify. And so many of the techniques of yoga, and we don't have time to go into them in an evening like this or a morning like this, but many of the techniques of yoga are about controlling energy, pranayama, control of energy, most especially Kriya Yoga, and I would say Hong Sa and energization also, which are keystones of our path. As we practice those, we begin to learn to channel our energy under the control of our conscious will. And when we can do that, that means that we have a key in all kinds of our relationships in working with other people. If we can control the flow of our energy and the magnetism that it creates, then we can create a force field around us that will help us work with people in the way that we would like to. Now, naturally, everyone creates their own bubble of energy, their own bubble of magnetism. And so the interplay of those is very critical. And we'll answer quite a number of questions this evening, today, that have been submitted. But that key of controlling the flow of our energy in order to work more positively with people is absolutely central to our teachings.
Now, continuing on what Jyotish has been saying, how can we, what parameters, what guidelines can we draw for this process of controlling our energy? When you mentioned, Hari, that Daya and Keshava and the pilgrims from America are now in Puri at Swami Yukteswar's Mahasamadhi, it reminded me that in 1998 was the first time I had come to India. We were there with Swamiji, and we went to Puri, and we went to Sri Yukteswar's Mahasamadhi, and we meditated there with Swamiji. There were just 4 of us plus Swamiji, Shivani and Arjuna from Assisi, Jyotish and me from America, and Swamiji. And Swami was in better health than he was the last 20 years of his life, or 15 years. And he was sitting cross-legged, so still on the floor, on the concrete floor of the little little mandir. And afterwards we asked him, Swamiji, will you bless our discipleship? And each one of us went up to him, and he blessed our discipleship. And when you said that, that image came to my mind so strongly, the memory of that time. But I thought, it all comes back to discipleship. What are the right attitudes that we learn in discipleship? Humility, the understanding that we need to change, openness to what the world is trying to tell us, acceptance that we're not always right, that other people's thoughts and ideas can be equally as good, if not better than ours, and to see all of life's experiences as coming to us from, in the case of the guru-disciple relationship, it's more personal and more one-on-one, but really it's all from God. All of our life's experiences come from God to teach us something. And this applies very, very much in interacting with other people. Everyone we come in contact with, from the grumpiest, most aggressive person at work to the sweetest, dearest child in our family, they're all coming to us from God. And we need to relate to each one of them, each person in our life, with that same humility, centeredness, openness to what they're trying to tell us, and openness to change. And so if we can use the flow of magnetism and guided by the right attitudes of discipleship, it will take us very far in working with other people.
So maybe Hari and Chika, you might have some questions for us, more specific ones.
Yes, we received many questions from our devotees. And I think in Ananda we often say, or Swamiji often said, people are more important than things. And we try to follow that principle, which is much easier if we are in the spiritual community and interacting with devotees. But once we go out, to what extent we can carry this principle? We know it, and we want to follow the principle, but especially maybe in the business or professional situation where you kind of you have certain goals that you have to achieve, or you're expected to do, to achieve certain things. And to do that, can we compromise or to, in that difficult situation, what is your advice that how we can follow this principle? People are more important than things or business goals or certain outcomes, tangible outcomes in the world.
Right. No, this is a very good and it's a central question. Obviously, it is easier to follow our principles when we're with others who are also following our principles. And that, in fact, is why Yoganandaji urged people to start or live in, if they could, sanghas, where they join together. Now in America, at Ananda Village, we have a wonderful environment that's very supportive, and we don't run across this particular question nearly so much. As you get farther away from that ideal, obviously it gets harder. The energies, the vibrations, the goals, the type of people that you're working with, it's much more mixed. Nonetheless, if depending on the strength of your energy, you will create an aura around you that allows you to work with integrity. And sometimes it gets, from there it gets quite complex, because most people, I would say their experience is that most of the people that they work with are harmonious or at least neutral, and there are only a few people who are difficult, but the difficult ones cause a lot of difficulty. And if that difficult person is in a position of authority over you, then it becomes much more difficult. Then you really have the only recourse is to put out the very best energy that you can, not really bending very much certainly not bending in a negative direction because of the energy coming toward you. If you can remain positive, that will be enormously strengthening to you in the long run. It's not an easy thing to do. Devi and I, obviously, we travel all over the world. So even though we have a wonderful environment here, that doesn't mean that we're always in a wonderful environment. And so we're well aware of these difficulties. But I would say stay within yourself, stay positive, and don't bend to go into a dharmic actions. If you're forced to do that, then you have to really take a look at whether it's worthwhile or not.
But also, Chico, when we use this quote of Swamiji, people are more important than things, he was using it in a particular way, and I'm not sure it applies across the board. He was using it in the sense of, in building a spiritual community, we always put people's spiritual well-being before practical needs. So if someone comes and they were, I don't know, a mechanic, and so they have all these skills and you need a mechanic, but maybe they want to leave that and they want to just
work with people,
let's say, then we would say yes, and we could see that would help their development. So if you're in a position of spiritual leadership, that applies very well. If you're in the workplace, and you are in a position of leadership, then again, it applies very well, because you're looking for the well-being of all your employees or the people under you. Excuse me. But in fact, we know a young man who happens to be our son, who just was promoted to a position of management and in where he works. And we asked him how it was going.
And in an industry and in a workplace that was relatively rough and not so harmonious.
Yeah. And he said, well, I went to each person on the team and I asked them how I could support them. What did they need? Better equipment? Did they need maybe a salary increase, better work, whatever it was? And I just told each one, I'm here to support you. And I asked him, how'd you learn how to do that? He said, from watching Dad. But that was sort of fun. But the point is, if you are working in an environment where your boss doesn't care about your spiritual well-being, how do you apply that principle? It doesn't really work.
Or even well-being at all.
Yeah. So it really is more how we work with people rather than how to deal with someone who's being kind of suppressive or insensitive to our needs. So we have to understand how to use that quote in the right way.
So the next question one of our friends has asked is about forgiveness. So a person who learns to forgive and accept all challenges gracefully in a good spirit is taken for granted in his own family. How many times should I forgive somebody? Jesus Christ says one should forgive 70 times 7. What did he actually mean? And so this is a two-part question. One was about the Christ teaching here, and another one is how to, accept and gracefully accept the way a family treats a person who's forgiving and good-spirited nature, and is usually taken for granted. Yeah, he's very easy. He will let it go, so we can just continue to be the way we behave, or something like that.
Right. That's a good question. There are subtleties to the answer. First of all, it should start with communication. In a family, if you're being ignored or being kind of just assumed that they can push you around, you should get to the point, and not during confrontation, but when things are calm, try to have a conversation and don't blame them. Say, when you do that, this is what I feel. I want to express to you how it makes me feel. So you're not blaming, you're explaining to them. So first of all, I'm not suggesting that you be passive. I'm suggesting that you be active. But now let's look at what is the opposite of forgiveness. It's being resentful. And being resentful is like carrying glass shards in your heart. It doesn't really help the situation. It just hurts you. So being resentful hurts you, and it does not cure the situation. So why do something that adds harm to yourself from a already harmful situation? And so forgiveness, honestly, you should ask yourself, am I being forgiving so that I get some sort of reward? Am I forgiving them so that they'll behave better to me, or that they'll compliment me, or that they'll like me? Or what am I getting out of being forgiving? And if you're expecting some reward from your forgiveness, it's kind of merchant forgiveness. Do it for your own self-benefit, for your own health. Just let it go and don't hold resentment to people. Now, as I started out, that does not mean that you have to become a kind of a dish rag and have people ring you and throw you aside and ignore you. You need to stand up, but you need to stand up in a way that helps them understand and rise to their own higher self.
And what did Christ mean by 70 times or 7 times 7? Well, I think he was saying under all circumstances. I mean, after all, there he was at the end of his life, the last moments, being crucified and mocked and rejected by people he was trying to help. And what did he say? Forgive them, for they know not what they do. And so he led with that energy. Swami Ananda led with that energy. He was hurt deeply by many people in his life, fellow disciples and others. He never held a grudge. He never, no matter how many times they spoke ill of him, he always had his heart open to them. So if you're in a family environment where they're taking advantage of you because of your good nature, because of your forgiving nature, that's their problem. It's not your problem. And our job is to live in the highest way we can perceive. And if the world doesn't respond, not to be surprised. The world is not, by and large, the people in this world do not live dharmic lives. It's the rare souls, the rare devotees that really say, I want to live Dharma under all circumstances. And so this is, I think we just have to accept. I mean, look at the world around us today. It's so tied up with revenge and this for that and this for that. And how few people stand strong and say, I forgive you. And someday, even in your own family, they will recognize that you had taken the higher ground.
You've kind of answered it already in this question, but we talked about forgive, but about giving also. I mean, before we want to give, we give, but how much, to what extent again, we keep giving. And at some point, I think we've all felt that, no, this is too much. I mean, they're taking from me too much. Some sort of the feeling. And yet, how to identify whether, when we say that, am I just being egoic or so protective and contractive, or, is it right for my own, I don't know, to respect myself, or do you, sorry, I'm not able to clearly say that, but we had actually, a few of us had that discussion yesterday. So with that, this conversation, it came to my mind. Do you have any thoughts around that point?
Yeah, lots of them, but we'll try to be brief and succinct. But when we give, as the soul becomes more refined, one of the things that becomes very natural is that we want to give, we want to help, we want to be generous and kind. In fact, Swami put it beautifully. He said it is the natural state of joy to want to share itself, the natural impulse of joy. So as we ourselves become more joyful, we want to share, we want to give. And often that takes the form of either material things or of physical help or kindness, support, whatever, many, many forms. But in many situations, it is better to ask the question, is giving this going to help the person that I'm giving it to? Master, for instance, said that even a rich person should not give too much to their children, because by giving too much to them, it weakens their will and it weakens their ability to create things for themselves, to do things for themselves. So in our giving, there should be also the question of, is this good for the person giving it? A slight variation on
Good
that.
for the person receiving.
Yeah. Is it good for the person receiving it? A slight variation on that is that Swamiji would choose a gift by asking, would the person like to receive this? And would I like to give this? And those two together. So this is mainly, he was talking about gifts or Christmas gifts or Diwali gifts, something of that nature, but it applies much broader. Would this be helpful to the person that I'm giving it to? And would I like to give it to them? And if the answer to either one of those is no, I would at least back off and try to discriminate and see whether it might be another form of sharing.
But bringing the questions together that we've been talking about, forgiveness and how much to give, I think a good way to answer both of those questions, a good tool, let's put it that way, is the more we can remain centered in ourselves, which is the fruit of yoga, the fruit of meditation, the fruit of Kriya Yoga, the more we can remain centered in ourselves and not wait for the world to respond in the way we want it to. So in other words, if you forgive someone, if you're expecting them to say, oh, thank you for your forgiveness, you're so kind, I was wrong, you're expecting the world to come in alignment with your desires. If you're giving to people generously and they're just taking advantage and not really being grateful, then you're tied again to wanting them to react in a certain way. So the more we can remain centered in ourselves and act from that center, guided by Dharma, guided by the right attitudes of disciples, then whatever the world does, that's their problem. If they're not grateful, if they're taking advantage of us, it's not like you want to keep giving and giving if they're taking advantage of you, but you don't expect them to respond, or don't get disappointed when they respond in a way other than you expect. The world is not designed, in fact, let's put it this way, the world is designed to disappoint us, because that's how we start. Because of that, we look for higher realities. If everything was always, oh, perfect, and everyone acts so nice and so appropriately, then we'd be comfortable. But God doesn't want us to be comfortable in this world, because this world is not real in the way the senses perceive it, and it's not our home. We have to find that true home where our soul is comfortable. And all the questions about human behavior come back to the single point of, it disappointed me. It wasn't what I wanted it to be. And that's as it should be.
So yesterday when we were just setting this place up and checking, Chika and I had a fun thought that before introducing the topic, what we'll do is we'll fight over the mic. Oh, me, you, no, I will talk first. And then introduce the topic, how to work with people. And then for various reasons, we dropped it. The next question is how to deal with people in workplace who take credit for your work, or who really wants to compete with you, or in other words, also, one is take credit for your work, and another point is how to deal with people who always belittle you, look down upon you, just in a egocentric way. Hey, look, I know so much, but you don't. So how do we deal with that in the working place?
Well, there are levels and levels to all of these questions. First of all, I'm going to pick up from a very high point. Why are we here in this world? Our real job is to reunite our soul's energy with God. And so everything, if we can bring it back to that central question, then we ask the question about how do we deal with someone who wants to take credit for your work? Well, maybe it's good for you. Maybe you're a little egoic about your work, and it would be good for you, for your soul's growth, to be able to say, even if a person doesn't deserve credit, to compliment the other person on how well he's done it. I certainly saw Swamiji do this often. And so if we're ego invested in credit and in importance and all of those things, then that ego investment, probably for a devotee, it's good to break it a little bit. So that's one aspect. On the other hand, is it good for the person who is taking credit for your work? And if it isn't good for them, then you might want to subtly demonstrate that you're the one producing the work. In workplaces, most people are savvy. I mean, certainly I've been in enough different situations and seen groups that work together. And if there's one person that's kind of a braggart, maybe he fools the others for a week or a month or a year even, but it doesn't last very long. They catch on. They see what's going on. And so if that person is in some position of authority in which people are afraid to say something, then they won't say anything. If they aren't, people will give that person feedback. But coming back to the question for how do we react ideally in a way that will help our soul's development. And honestly, the more we meditate, the more we get in tune with higher principles, the more we'll know how to act, whether to push back. Sometimes pushing back is the right thing to do. Whether to laugh, because sometimes it becomes so absurd that all is needed is a laughing response and everybody else catches on. And sometimes the right response is to be quiet or be humble. But the more we are in tune with our own self, our own center, the more intuition awakens and that we'll be guided. And the more we ask Master for guidance, the more he will guide us in the right attitude and the right behavior.
That's right. Oftentimes, this is a little bit off point, but it'll circle back to our topic. If I have felt that I really wanted to give somebody some advice, but I didn't know if they really were ready to hear it or not, I've often prayed and said, Lord, Master, if you want me to say this, open the door and make it be very obvious. And it's happened a number of times in remarkable ways where I'll be talking with a friend that I really want to say something to for their own benefit. And I'm just not bringing up the topic. And then they will bring up the topic. What do you think about this? And then I'll be able to say what I think. So remember, again, it comes back to where does our reality lie? If your reality lies in other people's behavior, then life is pretty rocky and unstable and unrewarding. But if your reality lies in your relationship with God, and then however other people act, you just ask God, if you want this to continue, then let it be. Just like in Autobiography of a Yogi, remember Master, and I believe it was Master Mahashaya, but I don't remember. Someone will correct me, but they're walking, and this very talkative person comes, and Master's praying, please let them go away. And the boy just turns and walks away and goes in the other direction. And so God's in charge, not the braggart, not the one who's taking credit. And if it's not right, you just have the faith to pray and say, Master, help me in this situation. I don't know how to handle it. And maybe the person will back down, maybe they'll change. I've seen it many times. And we just have to live our faith in the marketplace, in the workplace, in the cold light of day, because that's where it's tested.
And just to add, the more centered we are, the less how people behave affects us. Why do we get upset about it? Because it's affecting us.
I mean, just like that story in Autobiography where the two policemen are chased down this sadhu thinking that he's a murderer. And so the policeman takes his axe and chops off the saint's arm. And the saint just turns around, puts it back in and said, I'm not the man you're looking for. Well, that's a pretty heavy blow. And yet centered in himself, knowing what was going on. And remember, every single experience that we have with other people is given to us to learn something.
And it's not just, there's no reaction at a very, very high level, or there's super reaction at a low level. It's a gradual spectrum. And the more centered in yourself you are, the less and less what goes on around you is going to affect you negatively emotionally. And when a person is very strong in themselves, then it won't affect them. Master gave the example of when he was in America, going to many lectures and social events and so on. He said he would come home and his clothes and his hair were saturated with the smell of smoke. Cigarette smoke, cigar smoke, which was common in those days. And it bothered him. And then at one point, he just said, I'm not going to be bothered by this. And he took control over his own reactive process. He couldn't stop those people from smoking, but he could stop his negative reaction to it. And he just did that. And that was it. He said, I was never bothered by that again. And so, yes, that's a high level, but it's something that we should aim toward. And every step we go closer to that, the more we act that way. Next question.
So that high level which we are, which our Guru was, and of course Swamiji was, where should we begin with? What would be the first step towards that high level? Because the next question is, the person has asked, yes, I know I have to be kind, I have to be loving and patient with other people, and before talking, I should ask myself, is this true? Are my words going to be kind? I have to ask those questions before I speak. But when somebody pushes my buttons, when I'm triggered, something takes over me and I utter or say something which I don't mean, and later regret about it. I don't have time to think. That reactive process. Master was there, but for an average person, where can he begin with?
I'll just jump in here. You remember the conversation, Swami quotes it in the New Path, where Master is giving instruction to one of his disciples and telling him not to react to things. And the man said, well, that's fine for you to say, but you're a master. And Master came back very strongly. And what do you think made me a master? And so it's practicing it, it's living it, even when it's really hard. And that's how you get it under your control. And if you have a tendency towards gossiping or speaking negatively about other people, just reel it in. The spiritual path is about self-discipline, self-control, channeling the energy upward to the higher centers of consciousness. And we've got to live it in the cold light of day when people are being obnoxious and competitive and all the things that they can be and are. But our job is to practice the teachings. And the more we can do it, the more God gives us the strength to do it. I found very often in my life when I've set out to do something, and it was a big challenge spiritually, it's what I'm talking about more. And on a practical level too. If I just say, I don't know if I can do this, God, but I'm going to do the very best I can, this strength flows through you that you didn't know you had. And so, yes, we can say, well, I want to not be reactive, but look how obnoxious they are. It's no excuse.
Implied in this question is, I know what the right behavior is, but I forget to apply the teachings. And so if the problem is forgetfulness, let's work on forgetfulness. And so there are a number of techniques to try to think of it as a brain circuit where the energy moves very easily. Master talked about grooves in the brain and how you can retrain those grooves in the brain. And so one of the things is breathing. Reactive process, the mind, the energy, the heart, the reaction process is all tied to the breath. So really, if a person will just begin to work on the habit of, as soon as they start getting reactive, and you can feel it, you can feel when you're starting to get reactive. If you work on the habit of taking 3 deep breaths, just that much, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 3 deep breaths, you will already have gone half the way to the ability to control yourself. Because remembering to do something, remembering to take control is half the battle.
Another thing that might be helpful, Haridas, who lives in Bangalore, the Nayaswami Haridas, he used to talk about something called pre-prayer. If you know you're going into a challenging situation, and maybe it's every day you go into that challenging situation, but sometime before you're in it, pray. Visualize yourself in that situation, harmonious, centered, non-reactive, all the things that are helpful. And pray before the event. And then when you go into it and visualize, then you hold yourself, see the other person, or if you know they're going to be difficult, and maybe see them in light, maybe that will help them to calm down. But mainly what we need to work on is our own self, and to see your own self being calm, non-reactive, and pray for that and visualize it. It's sort of like a dry run, a rehearsal, dress rehearsal. And speaking of dress rehearsals, by the way, we still remember so joyfully the little play the children put on there in the Panchayal ashram.
Just delightful.
Oh, that was so beautiful. But in any case, prepare yourself for what you know are going to be challenging situations and visualize. Runners do that. It's how coaches train long distance runners. They tell them like marathoners, visualize the finish line, visualize your time. And if runners can do that, and they're just trying to, set a good running record, how much more important for us in training to be self-realized, to practice these things.
I'll add one more thing. Devi just reminded me, in runners, you see really good runners smiling as they run. And it isn't because they're necessarily enjoying the strenuous activity, but there is actually a physiological reaction that when you smile, you're more relaxed, and therefore they're able to run in a more relaxed manner. So bodily posture, if you're going into a difficult situation, you know that it is, make sure that your chest is up, make sure that your chin is up. Don't go in slumped over and shoulders slumped. They said that if people would undertake for 15 seconds, they called it the Wonder Woman pose, where you stood very strong with your hands on your hips and became strong, that you did much better in an interview or a test. So the physical aspect of strength, one of the reasons that we react to people is because we're threatened by it. If we become strong in ourselves, we're not so threatened. Next question.
Okay, so this is a different kind of questions about family, especially aging parents. So this person wrote, my parents worked hard until retirement and raised and settled their children with difficulties. But now they're in their 70s, and I see them very tired and disappointed in life because certain desires were not fulfilled or expectations have not been fulfilled. They don't seem to be searching God. And is it still possible to ignite the spiritual awakening so they can make their remaining years purposeful and peaceful?
The answer is ideally yes, of course it is. But the practical answer is start with anything you can see that will get their energy flowing positively. Maybe they would enjoy serving children, working with children. If so, then find a situation, maybe go with them to some place where they can work with children. Maybe if they have a particular skill, you could contact a school and see if they could mentor a child or something, anything. I'm just using that as an example. But what are their interests? What do they enjoy doing? Get an energy moving, and then once the energy is moving, then you can direct it. But it's like a boat. If it's just sitting in a lake, it doesn't matter which way you try to steer it, it doesn't matter. But if it's moving, then the rudder will be able to steer it. So you first have to get an energy flow going.
But really, the most important thing is your own energy and consciousness when you're around them. I was just talking with a friend today whose mother has advanced dementia and doesn't have a lot long. She's dying. She doesn't have a lot longer to live. And this woman was telling me, my friend was telling me, she has a sister who is quite psychic, actually. And, you know, the mother can't move. She's in bed. She has to be fed. She can't hold a cup, anything. And so this sister, who is quite psychic and meditates, prayed to the mother. And she said, Mom, what are you holding on for? And the mother said to her, she felt the mother was saying this, not in person, but through prayer, there still are some things I need to work out. That's why I haven't left the body yet. So if the parents have led a good life, your parents, your friends' parents, but now at the end of their life, they're disappointed, they're not motivated to find higher values, don't be discouraged. That's what life is supposed to teach you, that you're not going to find fulfillment in, okay, I raised my family, I provided for the material, all these things. But in the end, it's just like water through your fingers. It doesn't last. And so maybe they're learning that lesson. The best thing you can do, and I see it in all of Jyotish's relatives who are not on the spiritual path, the same with my relatives, just being knowing that we're on the path. When we're with them, we don't talk about spiritual things necessarily. But I remember when my mother was passing, she wasn't on the spiritual path, and she led a good life. But the very last, and she didn't believe in life after death. But one of the last things I said to her before that day she passed, I said, Mom, don't be afraid. And she looked at me and she said, I'm not afraid. This is just my next step. And she didn't believe that her whole life. But I could feel it was the grace of the guru that was helping her to realize that. So be there for your parents. Don't expect their karma is their karma. You can't change it. But just by your own faith, your own belief in higher realities, your own attunement with your guru, excuse me, all of these things will help your parents and just help them to, excuse me, we're both fighting off coughs, help them to live the end of their life in peace and with a sense of fulfillment.